maybe I'll just kick off. So welcome everyone. So just a few words about the CMI Arts Initiative. So CMI, as many of you know, is a math institute. And to many people, it's a surprise that there is an arts initiative. But I think it's something that I'm very proud of and very happy to, particularly happy to have Arshia Sattar today, because she is one of the people who has been a strong supporter and kind of, what should I say, architect of this initiative. In particular, we've had this Writers Fellowship Program in partnership with Sangam House, which has been hugely successful. Unfortunately, we could not have it this year for obvious reasons, and who knows when we can renew it. But we've also had other workshops, and now for the last few months, we have been doing this online series, which seems to have also attracted a reasonable audience. So I do hope that many of you who are online at some point will come to CMI and see. Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. But anyway, so welcome all. And I'll now hand over to Usha to formally introduce Arshia. Usha, you're silent, huh? Your mic is off, I think.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Arshia.
Hi, Usha.
It's my pleasure to introduce the speaker for this evening, Arshia Sattar. A celebrated Indian translator and writer, Arshia took a PhD in South Asian Languages and Civilization from the University of Chicago. Her abridged version or abridged translation of Valmiki's Ramayana was published by Penguin and has remained in print ever since 1996. A translation of the Sanskrit text, Somadeva's, I think, Katha Sarit Sagara, is also published by Penguin. Her other publications include Maryada, Searching for Dharma in the Ramayana, published by Harper Collins, and Mahabharata for Children. Her book reviews and articles appear regularly in the Times of India, Illustrated Weekly, and in the Indian Review of Books. And that's not all. Of many parts. Arshia has also worked with documentary films and theatre. She's been program director for Ranga Shankara Theatre Festival at Bangalore, also program director for Open Space, an NGO committed to promoting awareness. A visiting lecturer at Middlebury College, she has taught courses on Indian cinema and cultural politics. She's also been teaching at the Mahindra United World College of India, Pune, National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad, and Srishti School of Arts, Design and Technology, Bangalore. Now, as Madhavan just said, along with G.W. Gibson, Arshia co-founded the Sangam House Writing Residency in 2008, the first and fully funded writers' residency in India. Currently, Arshia works as a freelance writer and researcher. This evening, Arshia will speak on translation as an act of reading, Valmiki's Ramayana. She'll discuss questions like what draws scholars to the Ramayana, what philosophical questions is triggered by the text, and how a study of the epic shapes our belief system, etc. I think Arshia is a great storyteller, so I will be prepared to get mesmerized. Thank you, Arshia, for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Usha, for that very generous introduction. Hi, Srilata.
Hi. So yes, Arshia, good evening, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to have you with us today. I was thinking that, there are writers who write this absolutely amazing one book or maybe two books, and then we don't hear from them after that at all. There are writers whose books are varied stylistically, thematically, maybe even in terms of genre. And then there is someone like you, Arshia, who reinvents herself, if I may say so, by reading, translating, retelling what folks mostly think of mistakenly as just one text, and as a text that they know or that they are familiar with. And of course, the Ramayana is anything but that, and there is a lot in there that one does not know. The same goes for the Mahabharata. So when people hear your name, they say that Ramayana scholar or even that Ramayana person. So let me ask you, what is it that drew you to the Ramayana? What has kept you within that enchanted circle all these years? And how has your work shaped you as a writer, as a translator, and as a person?
Good Lord. It's lovely to talk to you, Srilata, but it's even better just to see you. I was telling Madhavan earlier, this is what we're reduced to, little faces on little screens. But I remember, CMI interactions with much, much, much affection. So thank you all for inviting me to this. That's one way of avoiding a very complicated question, Srilata, by just saying, oh, thank you, I miss you all so terribly much. Well, I think like many, many people across the world and across religions and cultures, a lot of people enter Ramayana actually with Hanuman. Because if you watch a Ramayana performance, a traditional performance, whether it's Ram Leela or Terkuta or any, Jatra or anything, everything changes when Hanuman comes on stage, right? It is completely electric, and it doesn't matter whether you're a little boy or a Tata party, anything. Everybody's like, that sense of wonder that Hanuman allows us to experience. And not only do we experience wonder in the person of Hanuman, but he allows us to share his wonder at everything that's happening around him. When he goes to Lanka and he sees all the beautiful women, he's like, oh, and he's never seen a palace so opulent. And even when he sees Ravana, he's like, oh my God, I hope Rama's as good as he says he is, because this guy's something. So it is, and again, like so many of us who live in India, I encountered Ramayana when I was terribly young. I was like 4 or 5 or something, and that's usually when we do encounter Ramayana in some form or the other. And, those are the wonder years, literally, when everything in a child's universe is magic or possibly magic. And Ramayana retains that right through. I mean, the kind of story that it is so much more than Mahabharata. It is a story of wonder. It is a story of magic. And of course, because it has in some places, a happy ending, it's a story of hope and reconciliation and forgiveness and, a lot of the things that we hold dear as human beings. So absolutely, I came to Ramayana through Hanuman as a child first. But then later, as a graduate student, when I had to that magic moment when you have to write your dissertation and you think you know nothing, and actually you do know nothing at that point. And then I was just like, okay, I'm just going to go back to Hanuman. And so I re-entered Ramayana as a sort of young intellectual with Hanuman again, because I wrote my dissertation on Hanuman in the Ramayana. And I realize now, literally in the last few months, that what I was trying to do in the dissertation was to understand wonder. What is it about Hanuman? What is it that makes him a mythological character unlike any other? What is it that an epic does for us? What kinds of suspension of disbelief are we required to participate in, to fully experience the epic? And we know that we do all of this, right? But we don't often know how or why. And one of my favorite stories about...
Sorry, I think there is a disturbance.
Yeah. So one of my favorite anecdotes from within the Ramayana about suspension of disbelief and wonder and magic and all of that is, Hanuman shows up in Kishkindakanda, right? So we've already had 3 books of a lot of action and all of that. And as soon as Rama Lakshmana enter Kishkinda, Sugriva sends Hanuman to meet them, right? And this monkey comes, monkey is talking Sanskrit, monkey is changing bhesa, monkey is like flying and all. Nobody says, yeah, okay, this is what monkeys do. And there's a beautiful moment where Lakshmana also says, your Sanskrit is excellent. Not how is it monkey that you're speaking to me in Sanskrit, right? So he's already surrendered to the idea that this monkey could do this. And nobody bats an eyelid, right? Then he has to fly to Lanka, and he's not flying, he's leaping. All of this is going on, right? Rakshasas are looking at him in wonder, excuse me, Rakshasas are not looking at him at that point, right? Because he's there in the dark. And when he meets Sita, she's the first one who says, what is going on? Why is this monkey speaking to me in Sanskrit? Am I dreaming? And that's when we realize that up to that moment, we haven't asked the most fundamental question about this wonderful creature, you know? So I think it is still that sense of wonder that keeps me with the epic. Of course, the other thing, you know, the more mundane explanation is I just have no imagination. I've still, you know, like this friend's daughter, she said to her father, she said, 30 years she's been reading the same book, you know, and that's true. It has been 30 years and I am still reading the book. But there is, I am still wonderstruck by it, not necessarily always by flying monkeys and 10-headed demon, 20-headed demons, 20-armed demons, but I'm wonderstruck by the many things that you can find in it. Like, you know, that in my first book of essays, Lost Loves, I found a love story. In my second one, which is Uttara, the Book of Answers, I found a very traditional Purana kind of text, you know, which embodies and disseminates Purana values, which are patriarchal, hierarchical, you know, all of, and in the last book, Maryada, I found it this very, very complex meditation on ethical behavior. And it has all of these things, you know, and honestly, if you read the same book for 30 years, it'll speak to you more and more. And it'll say, hey, you know, I'm also doing this. Hey, I'm also doing this. So yeah, that's the very, very long answer to why am I still with this text. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah, in fact, some of what you said, I meant to ask, but I'm glad you sort of spoke about it. I was, you know, sort of reading your translation of Valmiki's Ramayana. I think it's out of print or not available. I don't know. Anyway,
no.
This book. And
I switched publishers. I left Penguin and went to Harper Collins. So now all my books are with Harper Collins, and they've reissued an absolutely beautiful Ramayana text. So don't panic. It's out there. It's out there. It's still there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I said, oh, I'm going to hold on to this very carefully. But yeah, so I wondered what was it that drew you to this, to the Valmiki version rather than to any other? I mean, I know Sanskrit and all of that, but, you know, despite that, if you leave aside the question of just the language for a while. And I was thinking also, as I was reading it, about how you managed to make this version from another time actually travel into ours. In fact, you talk about it in your translator's note, and you say, and I'm just going to quote you from here, and you say, even if you translate a classic from within the same culture, we are never going to translate it from within the same time. The very notion of a classic implies that while it may be removed in time from the reader, it still speaks with relevance and meaning. Yeah. So yeah, one question, why did you pick Valmiki? Did you approach the text having figured that you would not fall back on what you have called a vocabulary of archaisms, which I know, of course, plague many other translations of the Ramayana and other kinds of Sanskrit or classical texts? Or did you figure this out as you went along and you sort of plunged headlong and then you said, okay, this is the vocabulary I think I should employ, and this is what I should sort of avoid? You know? Yeah.
Well, why did I pick Valmiki? Again, there's a very mundane reason, which was that I was already studying Sanskrit, and the place that I was at University of Chicago, they are, if you're going to read something, you have to read it in the original. None of this business of, you know, especially in a PhD program, right? You have no excuse for not reading in the original. And I wasn't about to learn another language, you know, to read Ramayana. But otherwise, you know, I mean, even at that time, my my sort of other language that I felt I should have learned was Tamil, right? Because I really wanted to read Kamban, and there is finally there is an excellent translation of Kamba Ramayana in the Murti series, but it's been held up for, you know, like all kinds of books are. So that's the mundane reason for choosing Valmiki. But I was very taken, and I still am, with this idea that it's the first recorded version of the story that we have. And I was very moved by, you know, the opening frame of the Ramayana, which is the two birds. You know, the hunter kills one of a pair of mating birds, and Valmiki, and the bird cried, the surviving bird cries out piteously in her grief, and Valmiki, the poet, is so moved by the purity of this expression that he speaks in a new meter. And that meter becomes the meter of the epic of Ramayana, and of course also of Mahabharata. Now that is a completely rubbish story, because the Ramayana is not written entirely in shloka. There are like 5, 7, 8 meters within the Sanskrit Ramayana. Mahabharata is more true to shloka than Ramayana is, but be that as it may, it's a beautiful story. And I was so fascinated by this. Look what it's doing, right? It's completely self-referential. It's setting up the origins of orality. It's setting up a frame for itself, right? And it is going to tell you a story about love and separation, about the unbearable grief of losing a beloved. So, and as then I worked with Ramayana more and more for my dissertation, because I was translating large chunks of it to be able to, you know, to get closer to Hanuman. It became extremely clear to me that this is the only Ramayana we have where Rama is not God, or it is not clear that he is God. Right? Bhakti is written backwards into Ramayana after Bhakti became the central emotion of Hinduism. When Ramayana was being composed, there was no Bhakti, right? So I felt that it could also help me, well, this is not what I felt at the time, but I realized after that a human Rama is much more, for somebody like myself, is a much more useful paradigmatic figure than a divine Rama. But that's because of who I am. That is certainly not the case for everybody, nor is it that I'm right and everybody's wrong. Neither is it the case that they are right and I am wrong. But it made me very aware of the fact that the Ramayana can be read in so many meaningful ways. So I still, the poetry is just exquisite. I mean, there is nothing quite like Ramayana poetry. And the miracle of the Ramayana, one of the many miracles of the Ramayana, is that whatever language it's composed in, it remains the epitome of that literary language. I mean, look at Kamba, look at like Tulsi's Manas, you know, Pampa Ramayana in Kannada. It always brings out the best that a poet could do. So it's a literary text for me. It's very much an existential text. It's about how to live in the world. It's about how difficult it is to be good. You know, it's yeah. So, and I've never, ever regretted choosing Valmiki as my text. Yeah.
I was trying to guilt you, Arshia. So,
Sorry, what's that?
I'm glad you picked. No, I said I wasn't trying to guilt you about your picking Valmiki. Glad you did that. I really admire and love it for its accessibility. And
thank you. I'm sorry, I'm just switching off.
Yeah.
Here I am. Yeah.
And also for the way in which I think you lead us into the emotional heart of the epic. So you get that, and you know, that is something I really like. So yeah, you spoke about Hanuman, and I also had I wanted to also sort of remark on the fact that, you know, it's quite obvious, I think, that he's your favorite character, and I was wondering if you could read us an excerpt translation of Valmiki.
Sure.
You said that there is a particular.
Shall I read the one that we decided on just before?
Yes. Yes.
So this is, of course, a Hanuman extract, it does, I think it shows the best of Valmiki because, you know, we're so used to the idea of Valmiki being a poet. We're so used to the text being weighted with a certain gravitas about morality and behavior. We're also very used to the text being one of incredible pain and sadness, Dasharatha sadness when his son leaves, Sita, all those months alone, abandoned, not knowing why her husband was not coming to fetch her, Rama's grief when his wife was taken away from him, and then of course their second absolutely devastating separation when he sends her away when she's pregnant. But well, let me just read this. And you'll find a Valmiki that surprises you, perhaps. So Hanuman is in Lanka. He's reached there. It's Sundarakanda. Sundarakanda all happens in one night. It's a moonlit night, and he penetrates Ravana's palace, and he sees all these beautiful women, but he can't see Sita anywhere, and he's starting to panic a little bit because, after all, he's Hanuman. He doesn't fail. He's also in a process of discovering himself, you know, how much he just realized he could fly. So he's also figuring it out, and the sweet, okay, so I'll just read it. So this is his interior monologue when he can't find Sita. If I tell Rama that I did not see Sita, he will end his life. And Lakshmana, who is so attached to him, will see Rama dead, and he too will die. When Bharata hears that his brothers are dead, he will die, and then so will Shatrughna. And the mothers, Kaushalya, Sumitra, Kaikeyi, will all die when they see their sons dead. Sugriva, the honorable king of the monkeys, will give up his life when he sees Rama dead. And virtuous Ruma will die of grief for her husband, and so will Tara, who's already upset about Vali's death. How will young Angada cling to his life without his parents and without Sugriva? And then, upset over the death of their leader, all the monkeys who live in the forest will kill themselves by beating their heads with their fists. They will no longer play and frolic in the mountains and rivers and forests. They will jump off cliffs with their wives and children and retainers. They will hang themselves, jump into fires, fast to death, or throw themselves upon their unsheathed weapons. I cannot return to Kishkinda. I cannot see Sugriva unless I've seen Sita. But if I do not return, those two mighty warriors and all the monkeys will continue to live in hope. I shall become an ascetic, eating only plants and roots and things that come into my hands without any effort. Maybe I'll find a pleasant spot by the ocean, one that abounds in plants and fresh water, and I'll make a huge fire there and I'll jump into the flames. Or I'll wait until my body is wasted and let the vultures and birds of prey eat it. Or I may just jump into the water. There are many disadvantages to suicide and many good things that can be gained by living. I shall live. Rama and Sita's reunion is certain if I live. The monkey pondered these problems and did not allow himself to succumb to despair. And this, I think, is also one of the wonders of Hanuman, because he's simultaneously Hanuman, of course, but he's constantly, oh, this is my monkey nature, kapitwam, you know, he can't rise above his swabhava, you know. And I think this passage is such a, and then of course the next thing he does is he's very clever. He sees Sita, he makes himself a tiny little creature and he hides in the tree, and he's worried that he will frighten her. And he says because she might mistake him from a Rakshasa, and the only thing that will ease her is if he speaks of Rama. Now that is a most unkapitwam, you know, series of thoughts, but he is both. He is both the monkey that we see, you know, at the local temple or at a tourist site, and he's the magnificent Hanuman. And Valmiki is able to persuade us that these two things can exist simultaneously. And I really wish Valmiki was a real person, because it's quite the feat of authorship. I mean, you and I know how difficult it is to just make one thing believable, but to make the unbelievable believable is quite a special talent. So.
Yeah, and Hanuman is us. I mean, I think that's the other thing that keenness aside.
But no, Srilata, I mean, why do you, what do I want? I mean, my secret desire is to speak perfect Sanskrit and to be able to fly. Hanuman does them both. Why would I not think that this is the most attractive character in the whole book, in the whole tradition? Forget the book. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I was, in fact, wondering if you would care to follow up, with telling us a little bit about your children's book. Maybe even read from Adventures with Hanuman, if you have it with you. In which Hanuman appears.
Thing. Yeah.
I love that.
You've read this book?
Yeah, I've read it, and I don't seem to have it here with me, but I have.
I'm so touched that you read it. This was almost the first children's book that I did, and how obvious that it should be about.
Yeah, and I remember your bio, something about how as a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or something, you were bitten by a monkey. Is your bio?
In Chennai, in Madras, in Gindi Park. We lived in Madras when I was a little girl, and so we went to Gindi, and there were these little monkeys, and this little monkey got out of a cage and bit me. And then I was taken to Hafkin Institute to get like I don't know, whatever kind of shot. But this is my mother's theory. She says that the reason I'm obsessed with Hanuman and Ramayana is because that little monkey guy bit me. I mean, who's to say that she's wrong? Yeah. So I when I did this Adventures with Hanuman, it's about a little boy and Hanuman, but I wanted it to be, I wanted to write the human protagonist as a girl, because I wanted to do a little bit of damage to this cult of masculinity that surrounds Hanuman. And as we know, it's a more and more aggressive masculinity. Bajrang Dal is just, one kind of manifestation. There's apparently...
Angry Hanuman, for example.
Sorry?
The angry Hanuman.
That new, like, whatever decal that's everywhere. But there's a police station in Travancore, I believe, that has Hanuman as its patron deity. And of course, Hanuman is in every akhada in the north and all that, right? So I wanted the protagonist to be a girl, because why should little girls be left out of this very, very particular fantasy, very fascinating adventure? But would you believe the publisher said, no, I think it'll be better for boys. So here it is. So it starts with this idea that there's a little boy, guess what? His name is Raghu, ha ha ha. If you know Kalidasa, you know why that is a terrible pun. So Raghu is this little boy, and he's bored, and it's nighttime, and he can't sleep. And he wants to encounter adventure. His own life is so boring. Adventure is possible, he says. It's everywhere. I just have to find it, Raghu said to himself, determined to conquer his boredom. The posters on his wall flickered briefly in the headlights of the cars that swished by on the street below. He saw Sachin Tendulkar lift his bat and Lionel Messi move towards the goal. Great day to mention Messi after yesterday's Copa. He saw Hanuman stretch and yawn and flex his muscles and step out of the poster and onto the floor. Raghu blinked. He looked back at Messi, who was once again poised to strike. Sachin stood firm in his stance on the wall. But Raghu rubbed his eyes and looked at Hanuman again. He saw Hanuman scratching himself and yawning some more. Raghu pinched himself. He knew from books that that's what you must do if you thought you were dreaming. Ouch, that hurt. That meant he was not dreaming. He stared at the monkey who was now standing in the middle of the room. Hanuman looked just as he did in the poster, brown and furry. But no, wait a minute, his fur seemed more golden than brown in person. His green dhoti was short and tied tightly across his waist and thighs. The mace he carried over his shoulder was large and sturdy, much like his arms, one of which was adorned with a thick, impressive-looking armband above the elbow. Raghu wasn't quite sure how he felt about men, or monkeys for that matter, wearing jewelry. But at that moment, he was too surprised to dwell on the armband or the bronzed anklets that Hanuman wore on each leg. Hanuman's chest was expansive, and Raghu could see the muscles rippling across his abdomen as he stretched. But the most fantastic part of this fantastic monkey was his tail. It was long and majestic. It seemed to have a life of its own as it waved and swayed and gleamed in the semi-darkness of the room. It was crowned with a bushy tuft that appeared soft and silky, unlike the other more bristly fur that covered the rest of the creature. "Hi," said Hanuman as he casually leapt onto the bed, his tail arching over his head and coming to rest on his shoulder. Hi, stuttered Raghu, pulling his knees up to his chest, as much to give room on the bed as to control his suddenly wobbly legs. "Surprised to see me, huh?" Hanuman smiled. Sort of, said Raghu, recovering himself a little. I mean, I'm surprised you're sitting on my bed. And then Hanuman asked Raghu, "What do you want? I heard you making plans. I heard you asking for adventure. So now what is it that you want to do?" And Raghu says, "I want to be like you. I want to do all the things that you can do. I want to be able to fly through the skies. I want to be able to grow bigger or smaller as I please. I want to be able to speak many languages. I want to be able to fight Rakshasas. I want to be able to carry mountains across the seas," Raghu said, bouncing up and down his bed, trying to keep his voice to a whisper. "Hey, steady," said Hanuman with a smile. "You can't do the things I do. You're a 12-year-old boy, and I'm a wonderfully magical, supremely powerful super monkey. My father is Vayu, the wind god, without whom no living being can breathe. And my mother is Anjana, a shape-changing Apsara. The mighty Pandava Bhima is my brother. I have been blessed by the gods and the sages. I threatened the sun once, and I could capture the moon if I wanted," bragged Hanuman. "Well, then, what can I do?" said Raghu, dejected. "What's the point of his being here if I can't fly and fight?" he thought. "You could come with me and ride on my back while I do all these things," Hanuman offered. "But you've already done them," said Raghu. "The Ramayana is over. Sita has been found. Ravana has been defeated. Rama has come home to his kingdom. What's left to do?" "Ah, that's not quite true," said the monkey. "The Ramayana is never over. It's always happening. At any given time, someone somewhere in the world is telling the story of Rama. Of course, they're also telling my story," he laughed, "and mine's the better story. Look at all the things I did. I flew through the air. I killed Rakshasas. I set fire to Lanka." Yeah, I know all that," Raghu interrupted, worried that the monkey would start boasting again. "As I was saying, the Ramayana is always happening. So I have to be around all the time. I mean, how would it all work out if it wasn't for me? Who would find Sita? Who would set fire to Lanka? Who would bring back the Sanjeevani and the Dronagiri mountain to save Lakshmana? Here's what I can offer you. I have to go soon to where someone is telling the Ramayana. I can hear it now. They've come to the part where Rama and Lakshmana are coming towards Kishkinda. My part in the story is about to begin. Do you want to come with me?" "Right now?" blinked Raghu. "Right now," replied Hanuman, getting off the bed and swishing his tail around. "Come on, climb onto my back." And then, of course, they go to, he can't join the war. The little boy can't join the war because he's a little boy, but he gets to do other stuff. And he makes one very critical intervention. So.
there is a sister in the story.
He has a sister who's sleeping through it all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And he says, well, can my sister see you? And Hanuman says, no, she can't, because she doesn't love me as much as you do. And that's the part that I had wanted to flip around. That's the little girl who can see Hanuman, and she tells her brother in the morning, this is what happened. He's like, don't talk rubbish, you were dreaming, But the other, one of the problems I had, I couldn't enter the mind of a 10-year-old girl. And somehow the mind of a 12-year-old boy just seems so messy, anybody can get into it. I honestly didn't feel that I could recapture my 10-year-old self. So, yeah.
Since we are talking about your books for children, I was wondering if you would like to also say a little bit about your very recent book, your Mahabharata for children. I think Maryada and this book appeared closely on the heels of one another during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So
both of them, they came out a month apart. Sorry, you're breaking up.
Right. So, yeah. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Am I clear?
Yes.
I think that's my internet connection. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I was wondering, what was it like for you to make that very dramatic switch to the Mahabharata story? And one that's the very different kind of story that the Mahabharata is, or stories that it is, and the very different kind of audience that you were writing for, unlike say Maryada or your Valmiki's translation, or Lost Loves and all of that. So what was that like? And what was it like to introduce the Mahabharata to young people? It's a huge challenge. I mean, it's just so many layers, so many questions, perspectives, and all that. How did you navigate? It's like almost like a Hanuman-like leap into writing for children and writing, the Mahabharata. Yeah.
Well, the first thing I must say that the Mahabharata is not for my Mahabharata is certainly not for younger children. It's for an advanced reader, of course, but it's also for the sort of 12 to 14-year-old. It's not this Amar-Chatyakatha watered down thing where there's good guys and there's bad guys and ne'er the twain shall meet. And I think that, the age that I was writing for became, it wasn't even a choice, because I knew that I didn't want to simplify the moral complexity and the tragedy and the incredible darkness that the text holds within itself. And, I think 12, 13, 14-year-olds are ready to think about these things along with their parents or their older sibling or, something. And lakhs upon lakhs of Indian children were watching B.R. Chopra's Mahabharata on television. Nobody said it's not suitable for children, right? But now suddenly, 30 years later, they go, oh, Mahabharata for children, not a good idea, rubbish. It's a very good idea. And children do have, by the age of 9 or 10, as you know from your own kids, they have a moral sense. They know when they're doing wrong, even if they don't know when they're doing right. Yes. So this is an expansion of that, because everybody in the Mahabharata knows when they're doing wrong. Everybody, from Krishna to Kunti to everybody. That's the point, no, Mahabharata, that we people know that they're not doing the right thing, and they justify it by saying, oh, it'll lead to a good end, or it's necessary for this or that or the other, but it's still the wrong thing. Unlike Ramayana, where everybody's constantly trying to do the right thing and doing it wrong, or it has the wrong consequences, So I find the ethics of Ramayana much more difficult and much more complex than those of the Mahabharata. Though again, as Indians, we're tutored to believe that Mahabharata is very complex text, all these moral problems. No, Ramayana's got the problems, because, So why did I even get into Mahabharata? Because, obviously, you can't read Ramayana without reading Mahabharata. They're shadow texts, they follow each other around. Rama, I find I've been able to become more intimate with Rama because of who Yudhishthira is. And likewise, I've understood Yudhishthira better because of how Rama has made his choices, and Yudhishthira's indecisiveness, and what does it mean to win a war where you've killed your cousins and your teachers, right? Rama never did that. Rama had this one enemy, but he comes back also from his exile and the war, a very different man. He's not, the prince who believes that all righteousness needs is to walk in the path of Dharma. Yudhishthira, of course, is destroyed after the war. He cannot rule. So the ideas of the sort of the complexity of Rama's kingship in Uttarakhand led me to Yudhishthira. And then, Chiki, who is my children's publisher with Juggernaut, I'd done a Ramayana for her. And she'd always been on my case, do the Mahabharata. I think maybe I just had to process this great big sadness in my own life. And unconsciously, I think that's what Mahabharata came out of. And then, of course, I was completing it during pandemic, the early days of pandemic, and everything just, it became so important to tell a story of bad rulers and terrible choices. Migrant workers were walking 800-900 kilometers to get home. Chapatis like lying on the railway track because they just got run over by a train. Those are not images that are ever going to leave us, I don't think. And how do we behave with the people around us when things are so hard? It's very easy to be good to everybody when everything's fine, but when there is this unnameable terror out there, it just all started to come together in unexpected ways. For anybody at any age, Mahabharata is tough to read, and I think children need to know, not children, younger people need to know that, and I think parents need to acknowledge that, this is a tough book. It asks very big questions about how to be human and what we will confront as human beings. And, you read the book with your kid. It's a good idea. So, yeah.
Do you want to read us an excerpt from that? Do you think, Arshia, or?
Since you asked so nicely, it'll be my pleasure to do that. I thought I would read what is one of my favorite passages. It meant a lot to me when I wrote it, and it's in the middle of the war. The war is coming to an end. It's like the 15th or the 16th day. So much destruction has already happened. Many of the heroes have died. Dushasana has just been killed by Bhima in the most violent of ways. That's the one thing that I had to really tone down, the sex and the violence, because not to take it out. So nobody has sex. A child was born, when the sage leaves her, a child was born. But the violence it's there, but it's not terribly graphic. So Duryodhana was devastated by the death of his brother Dushasana. His face wore a blank expression. His eyes were dull and tired. His limbs ached and he was unable to sleep. In the dark night, as the jackals howled and the owls hooted, he sought comfort with his only friend, Karna. But Karna had no hope to offer, as he too was counting the days that were left of his life. The two warriors sat together in silence, thinking about the choices that they had made and the separate destinies that had brought them to this moment. Duryodhana reflected on the fact that his stubbornness had caused a war that had killed his sons, his brothers, and their sons too. Karna Karna thought about the brothers that he could not claim, one of whom would kill him. In their hearts, they both knew that the age of Kali, the last age of the universe, had begun. It would be the age of destruction, of hatred and greed, and the earth would groan under the weight of humans and their actions. Water would be scarce and fire would prevail. Storm winds would howl across deserts, but they would bring no rain. Green fields would become barren. Bees and butterflies would no longer be seen. Birds would fall silent. The air would turn gray and heavy. And through the thick haze that covered everything, the sun would be pale and seem like the moon. Karna gazed across Kurukshetra at the flickering lights of the Pandava camp, and he sighed heavily. Duryodhana turned to him. Tomorrow, my friend, you must fight as you have never fought before. There's no other choice, said Karna. Not for me, not for you, not for the men that we lead. He held out his hand to Duryodhana. Come, he said. It will soon be morning and the battle will resume. Duryodhana embraced Karna and went back into his own tent. Because it's also, I want young people to see in this Mahabharata their own concerns about the planet reflected, because nothing has galvanized this younger generation more or better than the idea of climate change and environmental destruction. So this Mahabharata is also about that. The world will never be the same after the Mahabharata war. World will never be the same after pandemic. World is not going to be the same because we're not going to have water. So I think also the book will very quickly resonate with young people because this has happened in their lifetime. They're seeing it. And they're rightly going to blame their parents and their grandparents as the heroes of the Mahabharata do. You did this, man. And I think as a generation, certainly people my age, I'm now 60, need to take some very serious responsibility for not acting earlier, or for not acting differently in our lives, in the way we occupy the world, the way we relate to other human beings, all of that. So yeah, it's a wake-up kind of book. So
yeah, one question, then probably we could open it up for discussion. The other very obvious thing when when we read your work and think about it is, it's sort of impossible when talking about either of these two epics, not to be reminded of the politically fraught times in which we live. In which we have been living for years now. In fact, I think you talk about it in your introduction to Lost Loves. And I remember you say, I think there is something about how you actually put away your translation of Valmiki's Ramayana, which came out somewhere in mid-90s and did not open it until many years when you had to then teach the Ramayana, right?
Yeah.
So I'm reading that.
Thank you for reading my work so carefully, Srilata. I'm really honored and I'm very touched. Thank you. Yeah. Yes. So, yeah.
I think you also ask yourself the question of, you say, you really ask yourself the question of what scholars like you working with the Rama story, who are sort of seen as liberal or whatever, who thought of themselves as liberal, were to then make of this, right? So how have you answered that question for yourself? Has that, changed your relationship with these texts? Or what you have now subsequently wanted to do with them as a translator and as a teller of stories?
Well, 95 was like nearly 30 years ago, and God knows it was a time of innocence compared to what we're living through now. Yeah, and the Hindu right wing is no longer as focused on Ramayana as the first iteration of Ram Mandir and BJP and all of that was. So at that time, so many of us who considered ourselves liberals actually backed off from our own work because we didn't want to be associated with the kind of Ramayana that was being propagated at the time. And then I think, after about 5 or 7 years of that kind of disjunction, from our own work. And you can imagine how painful it is to disown your own work. It's like, what am I doing? I mean, I'm erased if I don't stand by my own work, and if I'm not able to feel pride in it, what's the point, right? But then I think after that, it got, in many, not only with liberal scholars and writers who were working with Ramayana, but, really not to be facetious, but even with fashion designers and all that, no, we have to reclaim this. We will use the color saffron, and I will use it, though it doesn't symbolize for me what it symbolizes for you. So we have to reclaim Ramayana. We have to reclaim these texts, right? And for me, as a non-Hindu, as a woman, as an Indian, these are my texts too. And I'll be damned if anybody can say that they are not, right? Now the goalposts have shifted so completely that now it's actually life-threatening to be writing about these texts, because, I certainly don't mean to offend anybody, and I'm pretty sure that most people who work with Ramayana and Mahabharata don't intend to offend anybody. But now it's not a question of anybody can be offended by anything, right? And the next thing you know, it's sedition, there's an FIR. So, the dangers have escalated to, it's no longer a question of, I have the right to reclaim this text. Of course I have the right to reclaim this text, but that right is actually putting my life in danger. And that is just horrible. That is truly horrible. You're breaking up again, I'm sorry. Sorry? Your internet is flickering again.
You're always over your shoulder, whatever. Is it clear now? 1 minute.
Yeah, it is. It's better. Can you just repeat the question? Yeah.
No, I said, no, not a question. Just to say that I think one is always having to look over one's shoulder now, whatever you say or write or whatever. It's just
Yeah.
It's completely that. It's totally, and
it should
yeah.
be unacceptable, but nobody seems to care. So
okay, so just maybe one last question, and I'll actually just throw it open. I was thinking about your book Lost Loves and other books also. So the at least the mainstream versions of the Ramayana, the Valmiki Ramayana, for instance, has been is in some ways a difficult story when you're thinking about it from the perspective of women, right? And how have you dealt with all that is problematic about, say, Rama's action, his rejection of Sita? And I know this must be a question, perhaps a very obvious question. Many people may have asked you this, but I'm still curious. How did you deal with it, and how did you, reconcile all of that? His mutilation of Shurpanakha, for instance, or just how terribly he treats Sita, and all of that. So, how did you?
It's never reconciled.
Sorry?
No, it's never reconciled. It's never reconciled. It's never resolved. Not in my mind, and it should not be in anybody else's mind either. And one of the ways I think of dealing with it is just to present it. It's like, Acha, what do you think was going on? Right? This is what was going on. And it's not what I'm telling you. This is what Valmiki is saying happened, right? That's the great advantage, as you know, of being a translator, because you're like, hey, guess what? I didn't say this. The guy said it, right? Or the person or whoever it is. But I think what becomes very important is for women to read these texts and for women to see those incidents and we have to claim these texts and we have to tell them to our sons and our daughters. We have to introduce these texts to our younger people, not let the patriarchy do it any longer, because obviously we're not going to tell a different story. We're going to tell the same story, but we're going to tell it in a different way. We're going to highlight different things, and we're going to say, look at what happened there. Do you see this around you? Can you make a cause and effect connection between these things, right? So the resolution or the reconciliation of various violences in both the epics against women, these are ongoing, the resolutions and the reconciliations, and they will only be effected by women. Yeah, it is up to us to take this back and say, this is what I want you to notice in this story. This is what I want you to think about. And not just for our daughters. God knows, like we're teaching our daughters all the time, right? We teach our sons because the problem is coming from there. Not because we are bad parents or bad mothers, but because it is everywhere. Yeah, this has to be the counterpoint. The contrapuntal narrative has to come from us, not by rejecting these texts, right? But by showing them for what they are. And they are beautiful as well. You know, they really, really are. They bizarrely contain so many different kinds of redemption, you know, within themselves. And, you know, if you read the text, you realize how devastated Rama is when he sends Sita away. He's completely paralyzed. He can do nothing. Whole of Uttarakhanda, he's sitting and listening to stories, you know. Yeah. That's what has happened to him. And we never see that. If we let somebody else tell us the story, yeah, then we think, oh yeah, okay, he sent Sita away, he was very happy, he was ruling his kingdom, he was fighting wars. No, he wasn't. He really wasn't, right? And that is important to, you know, the person who perpetrates violence has so much to lose. You know, Mahabharata is also about that. Look what it does to the men who kill. Look what it does to the men who, you know, yeah, make others suffer. It is their soul that, you know, really starts to rot. Yeah, and that is Yudhishthira's problem. Yeah. That is really, and yeah, and so these are the texts that we need to reread. And let's, you know, I mean, don't let somebody tell you the story.
You also have this book Uttara, no? Where the whole story you sort of view through the lens of the Uttarakhanda.
Yeah,
maybe that, in a sense, a response to many unanswered questions, problematic things,
yes,
text,
yes.
vacuuming. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and also your very recent Ramayana book, Maryada, which travels to the philosophical heart of the Ramayana and talks about really the whole idea of Dharma and how actually fluid and difficult it is for the characters in the Ramayana.
Yeah. And for all of us also, I mean, you know.
That's right, of course. Yeah. Okay, so so maybe at this point I should, you know, sort of, I can go on endlessly. I won't. I'll just open this up for discussions and questions. And the audience, if you have questions, please do put it in the chat box, and I could read it out to Arshia. Comments or questions?
So there is one, Srila, you can see, where Lavanya Srinivas.
Oh, okay. So yeah, Lavanya wants to know, Uttarakhanda, they say, is not by Valmiki. It is an addition that came later on.
Well, so is Balakanda. And who is Valmiki? Valmiki, I don't think, I mean, I'm pretty sure Valmiki doesn't exist. We call the text the Valmiki Ramayana. And it's quite clear that the middle books are, well, they're older and they're very different in language and style and politics from the Bala and the Uttarakhandas. And it's also in Bala and Uttarakhandas that Rama's divinity is established and it's clear. So we know that they came from a later period, like where bhakti was prevalent. And, you know, the thing that to me is very telling is that in the middle books of the text, which were written earlier, sort of in an Upanishadic, maybe a little later, say about 200 or so BCE, Rama takes Sita back, right, after this kidnap episode. And what we also forget is not he who tells her, oh, walk into the fire and show me that you're pure. She says, she tells Lakshmana, build the pyre for me because I want to prove my chastity, right? And then they come back and they live happily ever after. But when Uttarakhanda is added later and we've entered the period, the historical period of, you know, the early empires and the settling of what used to be oligarchic republics are now getting bigger. The Puranic period also is, the period of Purana composition is actually the period of Buddhist dominance in the Indo-Gangetic plain, and you know, in the subcontinent, quite profoundly a period of Buddhist dominance. And look what happens to the woman. Yeah, she comes home, she's pregnant. It's like, oh my God, somebody else did this. Out, right? So, the Uttarakanda is written from a period where patriarchal values are being developed. It's also the same period in which the laws of Manu were written. So, patriarchy and hierarchy going hand in hand, and forcing us actually to use the Uttarakanda as a lens to understand the epic backwards. So yes, the Uttarakanda is later, and it comes, I think, from a much more politically conservative period and socially conservative period than the middle books of what we call the Valmiki text.
Arshia, do you find any difference in the way Rama is portrayed in Bhavabhuti's Uttar Ramacharita and Valmiki's portrayal of Rama?
Bhavabhuti is such a complex, layered text. You know, as Girish Karnad points out in his introduction to the Bhavabhuti translation in the Clay series, to Pollock's translation, he says, this is fantastic. In the end, Bhavabhuti meets Valmiki and says, hey guy, you made a sad ending. I don't want that. Let me tell you how to write your story, right? And then, of course, Bhavabhuti creates a happy ending where Sita and Rama are reunited. And reunited in a very interesting way, because it's not like this didn't happen. It did happen. All of these terrible things happened, including Rama's banishment of Sita after they returned to Ayodhya. They really did happen, but instead of Sita leaving Rama and going away, she sort of forgives him, and they come back together, and they're sweet. They grow old watching their children grow up, and it's lovely. I think like every person, including myself, who has chosen to write a Ramayana, whether it's Amish or Ashok Banker or Bhavabhuti or Kamba or whoever it is, everybody actually goes back to Valmiki to find out what is possible. What can we reasonably make Rama do, or what can we reasonably make Rama think, or what can we reasonably make him say? So yeah, I do think that Valmiki is the font of all Ramayanas, and every single Ramayana, traditional Ramayana, will say, if not for Valmiki, I couldn't have done this. I mean, Kamba says so sweet. He says, I'm like a cat lapping at the edge of the ocean of beauty that is Valmiki's Ramayana. Tulsi in Hindi says, if it were not for how could I have written this without Valmiki? So, but yet at the same time, nobody is making a translation. Everybody is wanting to tell the Ramayana in the way they want to tell it. And I think that's very important, because the history of the Ramayana tradition is the history of people saying, God, I love this story. I want to tell it my way, right? So we can have Gond Ramayanas, we can have Dalit Ramayanas, we can have, women's Patachitra Ramayanas, because everybody's like, no, I want it to be like this, and I think that's just, it's amazing that so is Bhavabhuti's Rama like Valmiki's Ramayana? Rama, yes and no. Because he makes Rama into somebody that we can forgive, somebody that we can love, somebody who automatically
so much grief, so much
he
grief.
excites our sympathy.
Grief is expressed by Rama in the first.
Absolutely. That's what Bhavabhuti wanted Rama to feel, because he could not believe that such a good man could do this without pain. And I agree. I completely agree with Bhavabhuti, Who's going to disagree with Bhavabhuti? I mean, he's so persuasive, So
there is a question from Raghavan. He wants to know which recension. I just realized I don't know how to pronounce that.
Recension is right. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. So he wants to know which recension is it that you translate from? And two, how do you reconcile yourself to the Shambhuka episode? Perhaps you don't, just like you said that you aren't reconciled to the treatment of Sita. And the third question is
three questions. Okay, let me do the first two first, otherwise I'll forget.
Yeah.
Well, I for my Valmiki translation, I use the critical edition, the Baroda critical edition, and very much because at the time I just finished my PhD, I was full of this thing about like critical edition and scholarship, and I think if I had to do it now, I wouldn't be quite as persuaded to use the critical edition. But using the critical edition is very useful, and it could end up actually, protecting me from the Rakshasas, because you can always say, look, here it is, right? If you're using some other recension, they say, oh, it's not in mine. That is the Bangla recension. I'm using Western India recension. So it's very useful. And I think the Princeton Ramayana, which is of course this consortium of, the best Ramayana scholars in the world, Bob Goldman, Shelley Pollack, Sally Sutherland, what they've done is a verse-to-verse translation, and it's very, very, very useful to scholars and pedants. And there's a pedant hidden inside every one of us. So I do think the critical edition has a very important place in scholarship. Whether or not that it is equally valid or important in a general public, probably not. Yeah. So what was the second question?
Yeah, how do you reconcile yourself to the Shambuka episode?
Of course, I don't reconcile myself with the Shambuka episode. What is so great about killing a Dalit? Really, nothing. Yeah.
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 And the third?
Oh, okay. So I want to say this one thing, which also, Bhavabhuti kind of touches upon, that when Rama sends Sita away for the second time, or rather when he comes back, he loses his moral center. He does two unacceptable things. One, of course, is the killing of Shambuka, and the other is, the Sita's exile itself. He's unable to function as a moral human being without his wife beside him. And that is his great love that he has lost. So I don't think the Shambuka episode is unconnected at all from, the banishment of Sita and Rama's inability to act. And in both cases, both Shambuka and the banishment of Sita, he's persuaded to do so by other people, and he doesn't have the strength or the courage to act against that advice. Yeah. And the third question:
which text of Pampa, Kannada, did you allude to?
Which text of Pampa Ramayana? I don't know the text very well at all. I've read excerpts in translation, but I know it exists. But it's not a text that I'm terribly familiar with. Yeah.
I thought he only wrote a Bharata, not a Ramayana.
No. There's a Pampa Ramayana.
Ramayana as well?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for opening my eyes.
Not at all. My pleasure. That was easy. Yeah.
Okay, then there's a comment from Ajinkya who says he really enjoyed the conversation and that it's an act of reclaiming and so on. So thank you. On behalf of Arshia and all of us. So Pramath, there is a question. He says, Valmiki's Ramayana is in classical Sanskrit. There is a theory that literature in classical Sanskrit followed the courtly literature in Prakrit. Are there any Prakrit texts foreshadowing Valmiki's Ramayana? I am, like you, using Valmiki as a stand-in for a group of authors.
Yeah.
There's something foreshadowing. Yeah. Sorry.
There's something called the Dasharatha Jataka, which is allegedly the first Rama story that there is. And Ramanujan talks about it in some detail in his 300 Ramayanas essay. Yes, of course, what we call Valmiki Ramayana shares many, many things with later courtly poetry, but it does precede them by a fair amount. This is the problem with canon and classicization, that we don't know what we've lost. And so we don't know what was out there, even though, we don't know what we've lost in the Prakrits. We don't know where these stories were told, how they were preserved. We have some sense of how they are divergent from the canonized text in folk tales. Folk tales in different parts of the country. We don't know if those folk tales are actually earlier, whether they precede the Ramayana in any way. Ramayana, the story of Rama also appears in Mahabharata, in Ramopakhyana. It's a separate little section. And it's told to Yudhishthira in the forest at the same time that he's listening to Nala Damayanti and all that. And he's sitting there and crying as Yudhishthira, does mainly. And, oh, my wife has been kidnapped. Jayadratha takes Draupadi away for a little while. And this sage, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, says, what you're crying? Let me tell you what happened to Rama. And so does that version, the Ramopakhyana within Mahabharata, does that precede what we call the Valmiki text? Is it a later summation of the text that became so famous as the Valmiki Ramayana? It's just really, really hard to tell. And of course, when we talk about canonization and we talk about texts that have been handed down to us for thousands of years, they are texts of the elite. Yeah. What we have lost are so-called marginalized texts, so-called texts from so-called marginalized people. Where are the women's? Women have been talking back to the Ramayana since day one, right? In Maithili, there are folk songs. In Telugu, there are riddles, there are proverbs. Always say, what is this Rama doing? How could he do this? Sita, Sita, don't go there. Poor thing you. Don't be glamorized by Ayodhya just because they're rich and all. How could your parents have sent you to that terrible kingdom? So there's always been pushback against Ramayana, right? But those things have not been retained. We haven't bothered to take care. Well, it's not that we haven't bothered to take care of them. They have been systematically sent away. They have been systematically erased. So I'm not sure that at this moment, with the information we have, which is archaeological, literary, I'm not sure we have enough information to fill the great gaps in our understanding of which Ramayana came first. And, was it really a Prakrit story? And, was it told by women? Was it told by Adivasis? We just don't know enough. And, it becomes like a tabula rasa space where we can all project our own politics and our preferences. But that's precisely where we have to be extremely careful, because that is exactly what Hindutva is doing now. Yeah, it is taking empty spaces and filling them with speculation and basically a lot of rubbish. Yeah.
The classic balance between little tradition and the great tradition.
Absolutely. Between Marga and Desha. Absolutely. Yeah. But at least we still have little tradition. We still have Desha, right? But what about the stuff that's just gone? Just we'll never know it was even there. So, and that is terrible. That is truly terrible, because it deforms us as human beings, If we listen only to elite stories and elite problems and elite articulations of what is good and what is right and what it means to be human, that is profoundly problematic. We should have listened to women more. I mean, look at Merkel and the New Zealand Prime Jacinta handling COVID, right? Or refugees or anything, right? Maybe if we'd done this like 2,000 years earlier, we wouldn't be where we are now. Okay, enough ranting, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, there's another question from Adipa. I'm just curious to know if there are similar myths in other parts of the world. You said Valmiki wrote this from history, but could this be a mythical pattern that guided an individual through their life journey? What could be other Ramayanas in the world?
Well, first of all, they wouldn't be Ramayanas because they come from other parts of the world. So they're going to reflect their own cultures. I mean, if you look at even the so-called Ramayanas of Southeast Asia, they all have their own names. Pralab, and they the Indonesian Ramayanas, Allah shows up and has quite a lot to do with everything. Cambodian Ramayanas are Buddhist. Thai Ramayana is Hindu. So they're not called Ramayanas. We must be extremely clear about that. If we call them Ramayanas, we're guilty of cultural hegemony. Those are separate stories. But it's also it's not simply that they occur as Ramayanas. The story of a princess being kidnapped and by a monster and being held in an inaccessible place, and then the hero comes to rescue her along with a magical animal. That's a fairy tale that occurs in many, many, many cultures. The motif of, it's in the Iliad. I mean, Helen is kidnapped, right? A great war is fought for her. These are tropes, right? And tropes will occur in many forms, but with extremely different cultural signification. And that's, I think, what we have to remember, that Ramayana, to me, Ramayana and Mahabharata, even though they are common Indo-European stories, what makes them Indian is that we inflect these stories with karma and dharma. And those are profoundly, profoundly Indian ideas, shared by Jainism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. Yeah. And we tend to think of karma and dharma as Hindu ideas, but they're actually not. They're also Buddhist and Jain. And it's quite possible. In fact, we know that the fullest articulations or the complex articulations of karma and dharma were in Buddhist texts before they were in Hindu texts, right? So, so Ramayana-like stories occur all over the world. In fact, I'd actually like to reverse that. The Ramayana is one of a kind of story that occurs in many places in the world. Not that everybody is copying our great story, but our story is participating in a quite extraordinary literary culture. And rather than diminish our Ramayana, I believe it enhances it. It makes it bigger, stronger, more beautiful. Yeah.
I think we will sort of close the session here. Just to thank you very, very much, Arshia, for speaking to us on what's really a lifetime's work, and for your lucidity and clarity with which you responded, the generosity with which you answered all our questions, and for giving us a glimpse into your whole trajectory, into your writerly world, translation, this world, and so on. And many thanks to the audience for being so responsive and for being such an engaged audience. And we will keep you posted on future talks and events. Thank you.
And Srilata, everybody should have an interlocutor like you. You bring out the best in whoever it is that you're talking to. So my really, really sincere thanks to you for inviting me and for letting me speak with such candor and such comfort. So thank you, and thank you, CMI. I really hope to see you in person soon. But until then, stay well and thank you.
Thanks, Arshia. So I'll turn the recording off now.
Now we can say what we really want.